Hey there, welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the channel where history gets weird, but the voice stays calm. Tonight, we're exploring what getting high was like in the Middle Ages, that delightful era when pleasure was a theological problem and hangovers were moral events. Before you get comfortable, take a quiet moment to like the video or subscribe. Only if you truly enjoy falling asleep to humanity's bad decisions, and if you're still awake enough, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's oddly comforting to know how many of us are awake at the wrong hour, each in our own little century. Now, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, and let's drift gently into a world where intoxication meant something entirely different. A world of poppy fumes, ale, thick as porridge, and monks who brewed their own moral dilemmas. Back then, the word high didn't exist. You were elevated in spirit, overcome by vapours, or possessed by enthusiasm, which frankly could mean anything from mild dizziness to full exorcism. Science hadn't been invented yet, but enthusiasm had. And in the long, sober centuries before caffeine and therapy, people took whatever relief they could find. Herbs, prayers, and a bit of hope that God wasn't watching too closely. The Middle Ages were not kind to consciousness. Reality was damp, cold and repetitive, and if you wanted a little transcendence, you had to distill it yourself, often literally. This was a world where fermentation was safer than drinking water, and where the line between medicine, magic and moral failure was mostly written in Latin so you couldn't argue with it. If your ale foamed too much, it was witchcraft. If it didn't foam at all, it was probably still witchcraft. If you enjoyed it, that was definitely witchcraft, and yet somehow everyone drank it. Because even the church knew sobriety might be virtuous, but it was also incredibly boring. So tonight, you'll explore the medieval highs, from ale to incense, from saintly visions to suspicious ointments, the entire catalogue of human attempts to briefly escape feudalism. And if your eyelids start to feel heavy somewhere between sin and salvation, that's fine. You're already halfway to a medieval trance. You wake up in a small village where water is suspicious and bread is a social event. It's morning, though that's only obvious because you can see your breath. Someone nearby is already boiling barley mash in a cauldron that smells like a promise and a regret. Congratulations, you've just discovered the medieval version of breakfast. Beer. Not the cold, golden kind that comes in glass bottles with logos. No, this is small beer, cloudy, warm, and nutritious in the same way that porridge is nutritious. It's thick enough to chew and weak enough to call hydration. Children drink it, monks drink it. Even your doctor drinks it while lecturing you about moderation. Because in the Middle Ages, everyone was slightly tipsy and very self-righteous about it. Clean water was a myth. Streams doubled as laundromats, latrines, and sometimes graveyards. Fermentation, on the other hand, was divine sanitation. Boil grain, let it rot politely, and there you go. Liquid safety with side effects. Every sip killed a few germs and several brain cells, but at least you wouldn't die of dysentery, which made it the most rational decision of your day. Ale was everywhere, in monasteries, market stalls and family kitchens. Monks kept meticulous brewing records, though their devotion to purity ended exactly where the first sip began. They wrote long treatises on sobriety while simultaneously inventing strong beer. That's not hypocrisy, that's multitasking. In towns, alehouses served as community, centres, therapy clinics, and rumour distribution hubs. You'd go there after work, not to celebrate, but to survive. Peasants drank because it dulled the ache of work and the memory of feudal taxes. Clergy drank because it made the peasants easier to preach to. Everybody had a reason, and none of them involved water. The church called drunkenness a sin, but quietly supplied the ingredients. Wine was sacred after all. Transubstantiation might have turned it into the blood of Christ, but it still went down smooth. And when the sermon ended, most villagers lingered not for salvation, but for the leftovers. A medieval communion cup was essentially an open bar with moral supervision. Some moralists tried to set limits. The 13th century decretals of Gregory IX warned against priests who drink beyond propriety. It didn't specify what propriety was, only that you'd know when you'd passed it, probably around the time you started seeing double monks. Meanwhile, medieval physicians insisted alcohol balanced the humours, which was the polite way of saying it made everyone temporarily agreeable. They recommended different drinks for different temperaments, wine for the melancholic, ale for the choleric and for the phlegmatic. Well, good luck, you were probably asleep already. The smell of yeast, smoke and damp straw clings to everything. You take a sip of the lukewarm brew and feel, for a brief and holy moment, a tiny distance between yourself and reality. It's not quite joy, it's not even comfort. It's a pause, the one luxury peasants could afford. And that's the secret of medieval intoxication. It wasn't rebellion or indulgence, it was anesthesia against cold, hunger, and the long sermon of the life. Each swallow a small act of mercy, each hangover a reminder that heaven would probably have better water. Anyway, you drink, you forget, you repeat. It's not a vice, it's a coping strategy. And tomorrow, when you wake with a mouth like wet parchment, you'll do it all again, because in the Middle Ages, staying sober was simply impractical. You've had your beer, and for a moment you feel almost human again. Then the village physician appears and the feeling fades. He's carrying a bag that smells like despair and dried roots. Inside are powders, feathers, and several small vials that look suspiciously like regret. He claims to understand the human body, which in the 13th century means he has read exactly 2 books and touched far too many corpses. Medicine at this time is not about molecules or neurons. It's about vapours, invisible clouds of energy that drift through your body, deciding, apparently on a whim, whether you feel joy or die. There are 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. A cheerful palette of fluids said to control everything from your mood to your moral alignment. If you were melancholic, you had too much black bile. If you were furious, too much yellow. And if you were happy, clearly you were drunk. The medieval doctor's task was to restore balance. In practice, this meant draining something from somewhere and hoping for the best. Leeches were popular because they were cheaper than therapy and easier to blame when things went wrong. Bleeding a patient was said to release the noxious vapours. It also released most of the blood, which admittedly stopped the complaint rather permanently. To alter consciousness safely, doctors turned to subtler methods. They prescribed herbs, poppy for sleeplessness, mandrake for pain, henbane for practically anything that required a side effect. Ground together and soaked in wine, these became the earliest sleeping potions. 1 swallow could lull you into dreamlike peace. 2 could make you the subject of a very quiet funeral. Arab and Persian physicians were centuries ahead in precision. Avicenna wrote detailed instructions for opium dosage: a single grain to ease pain, 2 grains to silence a screaming patient, and anything beyond that to introduce him to God. European translators later copied these recipes enthusiastically, but often mistranslated grain as handful. Results were educational. Still, medieval thinkers tried to explain their chemistry with grace. They believed intoxication happened when the spirits of the head were warmed by external substances, producing joy, prophecy, or the urge to dance badly. If you smelled incense and felt euphoric, that was a divine vapour. If you smelled the tannery and passed out, that was a demonic one. The difference was mainly ventilation. Church physicians added theology to the mix. Pleasant scents elevated the soul toward heaven. Foul odours dragged it down towards sin. Hence the vast consumption of incense. Clouds of holiness thick enough to hide the coughing congregation. You weren't supposed to feel dizzy in church, but if you did, it was apparently the Holy Spirit, not carbon monoxide. Some monasteries experimented further. Records mention fumigations for melancholy, where patients sat in closed rooms while herbs smouldered in bowls. After 20 minutes, they emerged either cheerful or hallucinating. Success rates were identical. And then there were the perfumes, medieval aromatherapy. Civet, musk, frankincense, rosemary. A whiff of rosemary cleared the brain, according to one text. it probably just masked the smell of everything else. In noble courts, people waved pomanders filled with cloves to prevent plague and conversation. Doctors wore bird beak masks stuffed with herbs, turning medicine into avant-garde theatre. Through all this, the idea persisted that emotions were gases, invisible, unstable, contagious. Anger could spread through a crowd like smoke. Joy could evaporate if you opened the wrong window. The body was an alchemist's furnace, and the soul was the steam that occasionally escaped. When someone said they were possessed by spirits, they meant it literally. They just hadn't yet invented the pub crawl. So you breathe the same medieval air, thick with incense, sweat and misunderstanding, and you start to realise that the people of this world were not as primitive as they seem. They were experimenting relentlessly with the chemistry of being. They just didn't have the word chemistry yet. Only faith, and a few brave volunteers with strong lungs. Anyway, after a few hours of medical fumigation and one sermon about moderation, you stumble outside feeling strangely light. Your head swims, the ground tilts. Someone nearby swears the sky looks closer than usual. You've just experienced the earliest documented case of contact high. It cost you a penny, 3 prayers, and possibly part of your dignity. Congratulations, you're officially balanced. You leave the physician's smoky chamber and step into a quieter world. The garden behind a cottage where science and witchcraft are still politely pretending not to know each other. The air smells of crushed leaves, damp earth, and distant livestock. Somewhere nearby, a woman hums while grinding something in a mortar. In another century, she'll be called a herbalist. In this one, she's still deciding whether to be hanged or thanked. She knows the local plants the way modern people know passwords, by heart and with quiet desperation. Henbane, deadly nightshade, mandrake, hemlock. Every root has 2 names, one for healing and one for confession. A pinch of the first soothes pain, a spoonful brings visions, anything more makes you the subject of a very short funeral mass. This is the neighbourhood pharmacy, long before anyone asked for prescriptions. No neat glass bottles here, only clay pots, animal fat, and bundles of herbs drying from the rafters like upside-down saints. People come here for the usual things: headaches, heartbreaks, demonic infestations, all treated with roughly the same recipe and varying degrees of optimism. The church doesn't officially approve of her work, but it doesn't entirely forbid it either. Healing the sick is noble, enjoying the process is not. If she cures a fever, she's a gift from God. If she smiles while doing it, she's a servant of the devil. It's a thin line, made thinner by gossip and boredom. The famous leech books from the Anglo-Saxon world recommend herbs for every occasion: mugwort for prophecy, betony for headaches, and fennel against wicked dreams. They also suggest hanging dried toads above the bed for male vigour, though records are silent on long-term results. Medicine and magic were twins separated at birth, one baptised, the other burned. Take the mandrake, for instance. A root shaped vaguely like a human body, rumoured to scream when pulled from the ground. According to tradition, the scream could kill you instantly, which made harvesting rather inconvenient. The approved method involved tying the root to a dog, covering your ears and waiting for the problem to solve itself. Congratulations, medieval botany doubled as a workplace safety seminar. When ground into salves, mandrake caused mild hallucinations, heavy sleep, and the sense that your soul had briefly stepped outside for air. Used carefully, it was medicine. Used carelessly, it was evidence in court. People swore it whispered secrets of the underworld. Physicians insisted it only whispered nonsense. Either way, no one was bored. Henbane was another favourite. Its yellow-veined leaves promised prophetic dreams, or, depending on your luck, prophetic seizures. Villagers mixed it with beer for courage, which worked for about 5 minutes, and then with alarming finality. Belladonna, the beautiful lady, was used by women to dilate pupils and by men to dilute judgment. Even the Latin name sounds like an apology. Still, the fascination endured. The poorer the soil, the richer the imagination. Every valley had its healer, every healer her little bag of contradictions. She knew the moon phases, the right prayers, and the precise moment when curiosity became crime. To her, intoxication wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. If the church could use incense to speak with God, why couldn't she use herbs to listen? Of course, the authorities disagreed. In the early witchcraft trials, prosecutors catalogued these same plants as proof of diabolical intent. One judge described them as roots that summoned storms. Another called them vegetable serpents. Apparently nothing says menace like an unruly garden. But not all herbal highs were private affairs. In villages, people brewed what they called hedge ale, a mild beer flavoured with yarrow, tansy or wormwood. It didn't exactly taste good, but it kept morale from collapsing entirely. Wormwood, in particular, offered a gentle bitterness that sharpened conversation and occasionally ruined it. Later centuries would rename it absinthe and give it better marketing. When the harvest failed, or when grief grew too heavy, villagers turned to these mixtures for relief. They didn't want to forget the world, just soften its edges. A few sips, a few strange dreams, and the cold didn't bite quite as hard. If you woke the next morning with your tongue numb and your neighbour convinced you'd flown over the barn, well, that was just the price of experimentation. The smell of herbs clings to your hands, resinous, sharp, slightly sinful. You realise the medieval mind didn't separate chemistry from faith. They called it sympathy, the idea that plants felt your pain and responded accordingly. You treat them gently, they treat you kindly. Break that bond and nature gets dramatic. So you leave the herbalist's cottage with a small pouch of dried leaves and an even smaller sense of caution. The line between medicine and magic is thin, and you're already standing on it. You take one last look at the woman by her, fire, her hands stained green and her eyes calm as confession. In another era, she'd be a scientist. In this one, she's still a rumour with good reviews. Anyway, you pocket the herbs, whisper a polite thanks to the garden, and head down the road toward the nearest tavern. Because in the Middle Ages, enlightenment often came in liquid form, and besides, you're starting to feel curious again, which, as history will prove, is rarely safe. You step off the muddy road and into what passes for civilization, a low, smoky building that smells like damp wood, old bread, and mild regret. Welcome to the Medieval Tavern, humanity's original group therapy session, conducted entirely under the influence. Inside, there's no music, just a steady rhythm of tankards meeting tables, and the occasional argument about whether today counts as a holy day. It usually does. The room is dim, lit by tallow candles that hiss like tired serpents, their wax running faster than the conversation. The air is heavy, part smoke, part ale, part philosophy. You find a seat on a bench that has known too many evenings and possibly too few cleanings. Someone slides a wooden mug toward you, cloudy liquid with a floating something you choose not to identify. This is ale, or what's left of it, thick, warm, and nourishing in the same way damp bread is nourishing. The first sip tastes like earth and mild defiance. Welcome to the social experiment known as the medieval mind on beer. This is where peasants, craftsmen, and even the occasional wandering friar gather to debate everything from crop rotation to the meaning of suffering. The drink doesn't make them wiser, only louder. And louder, in a world without microphones, counts as progress. For most villagers, the alehouse is the only public building besides the church, which makes it the secular confessional. Here you can speak freely so long as you don't mind being overheard by everyone else. The host, usually an alewife, keeps things civil with the authority of a monarch and the patience of a saint. She pours, she listens, she occasionally throws someone out, and she knows every scandal within 10 miles. In another century, she'd run a small media empire. Conversations rise and fall like the tide, taxes, weather, livestock, and how all three are plotting against you. The drunkest man at the table always claims to have a cousin who saw a miracle once. Someone else insists they saw a ghost last week, though it might have been a cow with opinions. The line between theology and tavern gossip is thin and usually soaked in ale. Monks sometimes visit, not officially of course, just passing through to check the moral temperature of the laity. They leave warmer and lighter, having measured more than they intended. For them, drinking is a spiritual metaphor, wine as divine joy, beer as humble gratitude. For peasants, it's a reminder that God probably drinks better stuff. Taverns also double as banks, job centres and wedding venues, often all at once. It's where debts are sworn, bets are lost, and future regrets are drafted in real time. There's no paper money, only promises and witnesses who can't quite remember the details. A good night's drinking could finance a barn, start a feud, or both. The church, of course, keeps a wary eye on such establishments. Alehouses are dens of sin, according to the clergy, which is ironic, given that many are built on land owned by monasteries. The priests condemn excess, but they also collect rent from it. Medieval morality was nothing if not a franchise. Sometimes the talk turns serious, briefly, before collapsing under laughter. Someone will quote a local proverb like, "Ale makes the tongue honest," which is only half true. The other half is slurred beyond recognition. In that moment, the tavern becomes a parliament of fools, a place where logic takes the night off and humility hides under the table. Still, there's comfort here. You drink not to escape life, but to make peace with it. You toast the harvest, the plague's absence, and the fact that the roof hasn't fallen in this week. In the dim firelight, faces blur, worries dissolve, and for a few warm hours, everyone forgets their station. It's not equality exactly, just collective amnesia. Every so often, a travelling minstrel wanders in, singing about kings, wars, and loves that never existed. The crowd listens, half believing, half asleep. The alewife hums along, already cleaning mugs for the next round of philosophy. Even the local dog looks thoughtful, which in this place might be the closest thing to enlightenment. Eventually the candles shrink, the voices fade, and the air grows thick enough to chew. You leave the tavern swaying slightly, part gravity, part joy, part chronic dehydration. The night outside feels colder but somehow softer, as if the stars are keeping your secret. And as you walk home, you realise something profound, or maybe just slightly tipsy. In a world where comfort was rare and faith exhausting, the tavern offered both, in a cup. Not divine ecstasy, not rebellion, just warmth and forgetfulness in equal measure. The kind of high that left you poorer in coins but richer in tolerance for tomorrow. Anyway, you stumble toward your straw bed, shoes in hand, pockets lighter, conscience undecided. Behind you, the alehouse door closes with a tired sigh, and the medieval night swallows you whole, one more pilgrim on the long road to morning sobriety. You awaken to bells, not alarm clocks or subtle reminders, but heavy echoing bells that make the air itself repent. It's a holy day, again, which in the Middle Ages happens roughly as often as it rains indoors. The church calendar is generous that way, and while official doctrine forbids excess, the schedule practically demands it. Today's saint is whoever the local priest remembers first, which means the villagers gathered for a feast in their honour, and possibly in their absence. The line between devotion and catering is thin, and the table doesn't care. The feast begins solemnly, a prayer, a procession, a few words about humility. Then someone opens a cask of wine, and humility quietly excuses itself. Wine at a medieval celebration is not served by the glass, but by the philosophy. Monks brew it, nobles flaunt it, peasants sip what spills. It is sweet, thick, and unpredictable. A drink that doesn't ask permission before altering your theology. By the second cup, pilgrims start seeing double saints. By the fourth, they're confessing to ones that don't exist. The clergy calls this joy in the spirit. The peasants call it finally warm, and the local merchant calls it good for business. It's a system that works for everyone except the saint. You sit among them, your bowl filled with something resembling meat and hope. The air is heavy with roast goose, garlic and wax smoke. Candles drip into the food. Nobody notices. It adds flavour. A fiddler plays in the corner, halfway between melody and apology. People clap offbeat, but enthusiastically, a skill honed by centuries of practice. This is not gluttony. This is thanksgiving for having survived another season of near starvation. The food is symbolic, the drink even more so. Every toast invokes both heaven and hangover. Someone stands and proclaims, "To the blessed St. Lawrence who was roasted on a grill." Everyone cheers, not because it's cheerful, but because the ale is working. Nothing unites a crowd like shared confusion. Feasts like this were the medieval safety valve, sanctioned chaos, the church's way of letting off social steam before someone declared a heresy. During the Feast of Fools, for instance, junior clerks dressed as bishops, donkeys brayed during hymns, and people danced in the nave until the Lord's patience evaporated. Technically, it was satire. Practically, it was a divine excuse for misbehaviour. In France, records describe a drunken mass, complete with wine-soaked sermons and incense laced with laughter. Afterwards, the participants repented loudly, usually while clutching their heads and questioning their career choices. The church tolerated it, mostly because it was cheaper than revolt. Even outside holy walls, festivals erupted for every reason imaginable. Harvests, solstices, weddings, or just the relief of surviving Monday. Each one blurred the line between faith and intoxication. There were parades of saints, bonfires of vanity, and more spilled ale than actual prayer. People sang psalms with revised lyrics and invented dances that would later require confession. And for a night, everything turned upside down. The poor mocked the rich, fools played kings, and monks pretended not to notice. It was equality by temporary delirium, a shared hallucination of fairness. When dawn came, hierarchy resumed, but at least everyone had laughed at the same time, and that counted for something. Not every feast ended gracefully. In England, a chronicler complained of many entering church barefoot, others exiting without sense. In Germany, a bishop outlawed devilish laughter after a particularly enthusiastic Easter. It didn't work. Laughter, once invented, was difficult to regulate. Still, these feasts had purpose. They reminded people that joy, even messy joy, was part of survival. You couldn't pray your way through winter without a few songs about summer. The church knew this. That's why it preached restraint 6 days a week and served wine on the 7th. A spiritual economy of sin and forgiveness, sustainable, renewable, and always slightly hungover. By midnight, the candles are puddles, the music is slower, and the air tastes of ash and sweet decay. Someone is still singing about a saint who might be imaginary. You've stopped caring. The stars above blur like spilled ink. Below them, the feast fades into quiet snoring and unrepentant contentment. When the priest finally calls for closing prayer, half the crowd kneels, half the crowd collapses, and both are forgiven. Tomorrow's sermons will warn of excess, but tonight, heaven can wait. You sit back, dizzy and full, watching wax melt down a candle like time itself. It's warm, absurd, and strangely holy. Proof that even the most devout centuries needed something to take the edge off belief. Anyway, you raise one last cup to St. Whoever and whisper a quiet blessing for the next morning's headache. Because in the Middle Ages, salvation came slow, but hangovers came right on time. You wake to a sound that isn't quite music, the faint scratch of a quill and the distant drip of something boiling slowly over a flame. Welcome to the monastery. It's early, but then again, here it's always early. The monks believe that time is a ladder to God, and they're determined to climb it one prayer at a time, while occasionally pausing to take notes on herbal anesthetics. The air smells of beeswax, ink, and mild disapproval. Rows of jars line the shelves, powders, roots, dried berries, and several substances that would later require a license. This is the medieval pharmacy, though no one calls it that yet. They prefer the physic garden, which sounds gentler and hides the explosions nicely. The monks tend their plants with the precision of accountants and the patience of saints. Every leaf has its purpose. Poppy for sleep, valerian for nerves, hemp for rope and other creative uses. Hildegard of Bingen, the most famous of their number, wrote that the soul of herbs rejoices the soul of man. It's unclear if she meant that literally, but the results suggest she might have tested it personally. Here in the herbarium, the rule of silence is occasionally interrupted by coughing, a natural side effect of the experimental. Vapours. One brother stirs a pot containing something viscous and promising. It's called aqua vitae, the water of life. Later people will call it alcohol. At the moment it's technically medicine, which is how they sleep at night. The irony, of course, is that the men sworn to avoid intoxication are the same ones inventing it. They distill, measure and document every recipe with meticulous care, recording symptoms, dosages, and the occasional spontaneous hymn. Abstinence brewed daily from 9 to 5. Each jar bears a label in Latin, which is less about accuracy and more about plausible deniability. Lacrima papaveris, the tear of the poppy. Spiritus vini, the spirit of wine. Unguentum quietum, the ointment of calm. A novice translating them for the first time might think he's reading poetry. In a way, he is. Every remedy is a small confession written to the body. The monks justify their work as compassion. Pain, they reason, distracts from prayer, and prayer, as management keeps reminding them, is the main product of the monastery. So they test herbs, tinctures and powders on the sick, which in those days included almost everyone. If a mixture worked, it was God's mercy. If it didn't, it was God's will. Either way, the paperwork looked identical. Not all experiments are equally divine. A few monasteries begin experimenting with distillation, boiling fermented grain and capturing the vapours in copper coils. They call it extracting purity. Modern chemistry calls it alcohol. The resulting liquid is sharp, clear and immediately popular among the brothers for medicinal use. A few extra prayers are added to the schedule just to balance the equation. Visitors arrive from nearby villages carrying the usual range of ailments: fevers, headaches, demons. The monks treat all three with roughly the same mixture, a soothing tonic of wine, honey and strong faith. It doesn't cure much, but it makes everyone too drowsy to complain. Some orders even keep detailed ledgers of their brewing. The Benedictines record yield, clarity, and spiritual side effects. The Cistercians develop a lighter version for daily use. Just enough to remember God fondly, not vividly. It's a delicate distinction, but one they maintain with professional enthusiasm. In a corner, the librarian copies a treatise on opium from an Arabic source. He doesn't understand every word, but he appreciates the diagrams. The text warns of overdosing, a concept the West will ignore for another 600 years. He carefully illuminates the capital letters with gold leaf, because if you're going to invent pharmacy, you might as well make it pretty. Even their failures are educational. The monastery annals mention Brother Matthew's sleep draught, which successfully put a patient under for surgery, and also for the rest of his natural life. After that, they adjusted the dose, slightly. Progress, like penance, comes in small steps. By evening, the herb garden glows amber in the sunset. The monks walk its paths murmuring psalms, each step releasing a faint perfume of rosemary and regret. You watch them move like quiet bees between the beds of plants, their hands gentle, their minds elsewhere. It's easy to forget that these men, in their long habits and quiet industry, are building the foundation of both medicine and addiction. When the bells toll for Compline, they close their books, cover their jars, and extinguish the flames. The scent of warm resin and extinguished candles lingers, a fragrance halfway between heaven and hangover. As the last monk leaves, One small bottle remains uncorked on the table, its contents shimmering faintly in the firelight. A drop of distilled mercy, labelled simply ad dolorem corporis, for the pain of the body. You could almost imagine adding another line beneath it, and perhaps the soul. Anyway, the night grows quiet, the monks retreat to their prayers, the herbs sleep in their pots, and somewhere in the dark the next experiment is already forming, because healing, like sin, is hard to quit. You don't so much visit a medieval surgeon as survive one. His workspace is not a hospital, it's a room with ambition. The air smells of vinegar, sweat, and bravery in small doses. Tools hang from the wall like accusations, knives, saws, hooks, and one suspiciously cheerful hammer. There's no anaesthesia yet, only faith, alcohol, and poor timing. The surgeon greets you warmly, because he's not paid by results. He's paid in advance. You explain your ailment, which could be anything from a broken arm to an existential crisis. He nods, opens a small jar, and begins to mix something that looks like regret and smells like a monastery on payday. This is Dwale, a medieval sleeping potion. It's a cocktail of poppy, hemlock, lettuce seed, bile, vinegar, and wine. Every ingredient does something. Not always the same thing, but certainly something. It's supposed to make you sleep deeply enough to miss the sound of soaring. It often succeeds, sometimes forever. The surgeon's assistant, usually a local farmer with steady hands and no emotional attachments, holds you still. A prayer is said, because hope costs nothing. Lord, the surgeon murmurs, guide my hand and keep him breathing. It's a touching sentiment, especially since the two goals rarely align. The drink burns going down. The room tilts slightly, the edges soften, and your limbs turn to polite arguments. Someone tightens a strap across your chest for stability. Then comes the sound, a metallic scrape, followed by a confident, "This won't take long," which is medieval for good luck. Surgery in this age is equal parts science, carpentry, and optimism. There are no gloves, no masks, and no clear distinction between tools for meat and tools for medicine. Amputation is performed with speed and a firm belief in divine intervention. If you faint, congratulations, you've invented anesthesia. If you scream, that's considered a good sign. It means you're still a paying customer. Monks occasionally assist because who else would volunteer? They hold candles, recite psalms, and occasionally look away at strategic moments. Blood stains the floor, the table, and any theology within reach. Afterwards, the wound is packed with honey, moss, or whatever happened to be closest. The patient is offered wine, prayer, and the promise of better luck in heaven. And yet, amid all the chaos, progress lurks. Surgeons notice that certain mixtures, the ones with poppy and mandrake, calm the body faster. They record these findings carefully right next to the recipes for inks and pickling brine. Medicine, preservation, and intoxication often use the same tools, only the dosage differs. When Dwale works, it's almost miraculous. The patient breathes slowly, the body stills, and for the first time in recorded history, surgery becomes slightly less traumatic. When it doesn't work, well, the church simply adds another name to the list of martyrs of medicine. One chronicler describes an operation where the patient fell into divine silence midway through. The surgeon, delighted by the lack of movement, completed the procedure perfectly. Only later did he realize the silence was eternal. The report concludes, the soul departed most peacefully. Medieval euphemism was an art form. Still, these experiments mattered. They laid the groundwork for anesthesia, the understanding that pain could be controlled, even if that control occasionally overstepped its brief. They taught physicians that the human body responds to chemistry, not just prayer, and they proved that curiosity, however misguided, is sometimes the kindest form of courage. After the operation, you're bundled in linen and told to rest. Someone lights incense to purify the air, which helps no one but smells devout. Outside, rain patters against the shutters. Inside, the fire pops and a monk hums softly, perhaps to drown the memory of the sore. You drift somewhere between agony and sleep, the same borderland where most of medieval medicine operated. By dawn, if you're lucky, you wake. The surgeon checks your pulse, declares you improved, and immediately writes to the bishop about his success. If you don't wake, he still writes to the bishop. The difference is mostly punctuation. Either way, the experiment continues. New herbs are added, old ones discarded, and the line between cure and poison blurs a little more. Each success inspires faith, each failure inspires caution. Between the two lies, progress, crawling forward on trembling legs. So you close your eyes and breathe in the smell of herbs, iron and fire. Somewhere beneath the pain, a strange peace settles. The kind that comes not from healing, but from the knowledge that everyone is trying their best with limited information and unlimited confidence. And really that's the essence of medicine in every century. Anyway, you sleep, or at least pretend to. The surgeon wipes his tools, the monk thanks God, and the world quietly takes one uncertain step closer to anesthesia, one scream at a time. Night has fallen again. The monks are asleep, the surgeons are cleaning their sores, and somewhere beyond the fields a small fire flickers in the dark. You follow the smell. Not smoke exactly, but something sweeter, stranger, and faintly dangerous. It smells like curiosity that's been left unattended. In a clearing stands a woman. Her hair is tied with thread, her hands stained green. She's grinding something thick and oily in a bowl that looks older than memory. The mixture hisses softly, the way secrets do when they're almost ready. This is the legendary witch's ointment, a recipe passed along in whispers, hidden in herbal manuals between prayers for rain and instructions for making soup. It contains henbane, belladonna, mandrake, datura, and just enough imagination to make it fly. The base is animal fat, soft, warm, and unwillingly volunteered. Together it forms a potion not meant for drinking but for skin. Absorption, not ingestion. Alchemy, but with better results. She stirs slowly, murmuring words that sound like Latin if you're tired enough. In truth, they're probably just grocery notes to herself. The air hums with something invisible. Fear, perhaps, or anticipation. People will later call this black magic. For now, it's just chemistry and candlelight. The idea is simple. Rub the ointment onto the body and dream yourself somewhere better. The active compounds cause vivid hallucinations. Flying, dancing, floating. To an observer, the witch lies still. In her mind, she's in motion. The trial records say she soars over villages and fields. Modern pharmacology says she's tripping on tryptane alkaloids. Both explanations work fine, depending on your audience. The church naturally disapproves. It disapproves of most things that don't involve tithes. To them, these visions are the devil's counterfeit of divine ecstasy. When women confess to flying, they're accused of consorting with demons. When monks describe their mystical visions, they're canonized. Same altitude, different branding. Still, the stories spread. A 15th century inquisitor describes women who anointed themselves with a green grease and claimed to have joined nocturnal feasts with the devil. He was horrified, not by the content, but by how much geography they covered in a single night. That kind of productivity was clearly unnatural. In reality, these ointments were experimental pharmacology at its most intimate. They could numb pain, induce sleep, or, depending on the dose, remove the need for sleep permanently. Women used them to ease childbirth, men used them to escape exhaustion, and both found themselves accused of having too much fun for the local bishop's comfort. There's a quiet irony in it all. The same plants growing in the monastery garden, henbane, mandrake, poppy, were considered holy when handled by men in robes, and diabolical when handled by women in aprons. Botany was less about biology and more about gender politics. One confession tells of a woman who believed she rode through the night to meet other witches. Investigators later found her asleep beside her fire, her hands coated in ointment, her face serene. The vision was real to her, and that was enough to terrify everyone who couldn't explain it. Science calls it absorption hallucination. The church called it proof. History calls it Tuesday. The ointment itself was an art form. Too much belladonna and you'd never wake. Too little and you'd just smell odd for several days. Henbane added visions, Mandrake added narrative coherence. It was in its way the medieval version of experimental literature. Over time, these recipes spread through rumour and panic. Illustrations in witch hunter manuals showed women flying on broomsticks. A practical detail, since brooms were ideal for applying ointment to hard-to-reach areas. Scholars later argued that the broom became a symbol not of flight, but of personal independence, which, in the Middle Ages, was just as heretical. You stand in the clearing and watch the woman finish her preparation. She sets the bowl aside, dips 2 fingers into the mixture and closes her eyes. The world grows very still. The fire crackles, the air cools. Somewhere a dog barks, confused. Then she lies down, breathing slow, her lips forming a faint smile. In her dream she flies, over the trees, over the hills, over the villages where people whisper her name and lock their doors. She sees the stars up close, feels the wind on her face, and for a few blessed minutes she escapes gravity, guilt, and geography. It's not evil, it's relief. And in a world where salvation takes decades and penance takes hours, a few minutes of freedom counts as a miracle. When dawn comes, she wakes shivering, her fingers stained and her mind still half aloft. She cleans her tools, feeds the fire, and disappears before the villagers rise. By evening, the rumour of her flight will spread faster than any scientific explanation ever could, and soon enough someone will tell a priest, and that historically is how chemistry ends. Anyway, the ointment cools in the bowl. The air still smells faintly of smoke, time, and rebellion. You turn to leave, feeling lighter, as though a little of the ointment's magic has rubbed off on you too. Just enough to understand why humans, in every century, keep searching for ways to rise, even if only in their sleep. The next high arrives quietly, disguised as breakfast. You bite into your daily bread, coarse, dark, and heroic in texture, and think nothing of it. It's the same loaf your ancestors ate. Your neighbours eat, and your priest warns you not to enjoy too much. But today, something in the grain is different. You just don't know it yet. The bread tastes faintly bitter, like disappointment and survival. It's made from rye, the poor man's wheat, harvested from fields that flooded last spring and never quite dried. Moisture breeds mould, and mould breeds miracles. This particular fungus, a modest grey bloom clinging to the rye kernels, is called ergot. It looks harmless, but then so did theology at first. By evening the village is restless. People complain of tingling fingers, twitching muscles, and a peculiar warmth spreading through their limbs. The priest declares it divine fervour. The miller blames bad spirits. The truth, as usual, is somewhere between chemistry and negligence. Soon the tingling becomes spasms, the warmth turns to fire, and the air fills with the sound of people finding religion the hard way. Those afflicted claim to see angels, bright and terrible, descending from the rafters. They hear choirs, smell sulphur, and begin to dance. It's not graceful dancing, it's the desperate flailing of bodies trying to leave themselves behind. Chroniclers will later call it Ignis Caesar, the holy fire, or more helpfully St. Anthony's fire. It sweeps across Europe in waves, sparing no one but the gluten intolerant. Whole towns convulse in ecstatic misery. Fingers blacken and fall away, limbs twist into grotesque devotion, and the lucky ones merely hallucinate their way into confession. The Church, faced with this spectacle, does what it always does best: names a saint and opens a hospital. The Order of St. Anthony found special infirmaries across France, where monks feed the afflicted white bread and prayer, the medieval equivalent of try unplugging it and plugging it back in. Miraculously, the patients improve. The reason is simple: the monks bake with wheat, not rye. But no one wants to ruin a perfectly good miracle with an agricultural explanation. The afflicted call their recovery divine. The monks agree, and everyone goes home convinced that sainthood is the only reliable form of medical insurance. Ergot poisoning doesn't just burn the body, it alters the mind. People see visions, bright landscapes of fire and colour. They claim to walk with angels, to see Christ in the clouds, to smell paradise in the smoke of their own misery. For a brief and terrible moment, everyone is holy. It's the only rave the church ever approved. In some towns, the outbreaks become celebrations. Dancers fill the streets. Their movements half agony, half ecstasy. They whirl, collapse, and rise again, laughing and crying at once. Spectators join in, not out of compassion but curiosity. It looks contagious, so it probably is. Soon the entire market square is moving like a single, deranged organism, a medieval flash mob powered by fungus and faith. Authorities are baffled. Some call it possession, others blame witchcraft. Few blame women, because that usually works. Doctors prescribe cold baths and amputation, often in that order. Nothing helps. Eventually the fever burns itself out, or the bread runs out, and life somehow continues. Centuries later, scientists identify ergot's chemical byproduct, lysergic acid. A distant descendant of it will one day be called LSD. It turns out the Middle Ages accidentally discovered hallucinogens. They just lack the branding. No posters, no music festivals, just hallucinations and the faint smell of toast. But in its own grotesque way, the ergot plague revealed something profound. That the boundary between illness and vision, sin and salvation, was as thin as a slice of rye. People saw angels because they needed to, and blamed demons because someone had to take the fall. Faith filled in the gaps that science hadn't named yet, and the fungus, indifferent and efficient, went on doing its work. When the fires die down and the spasms stop, the survivors walk through their villages with new humility. The burned fields are ploughed again, the same seeds sown, the same mistakes repeated. Because in the Middle Ages, enlightenment was seasonal, and so you stand in the square surrounded by the echoes of dancing feet and unanswered prayers. The air smells of smoke, bread, and something sweetly rotten. You realise that every civilization, at some point, accidentally poisons itself in the pursuit of comfort. The Middle Ages just managed to make it look religious. Anyway, you brush the ash from your clothes and keep walking. You've seen holy madness, medical mystery, and moral panic. And the road still stretches ahead toward new lands and new substances. The next high, as it happens, comes from abroad, and this one smells faintly of spice, sand, and hypocrisy. You'd think Europe had learned its lesson about consuming mysterious substances. It had not. The year is somewhere between crusade and hangover, and a few thousand restless souls are marching east, armed with swords, faith, and absolutely no curiosity management. They go to reclaim the Holy Land. They return with souvenirs, sunburns, and a new appreciation for smoke. The Crusades are, among other things, history's most chaotic cultural exchange program. Europe sends its sons, the East sends back mathematics, medicine, spices, and stories too strange to verify. Among these stories is one about a sect of assassins who supposedly used a strange herb to reach paradise before performing their duties. It was called hashish. Europe, never one to miss a marketing opportunity, promptly names them the hashisheen and assumes every murder in the region involves drugs. The idea sticks. So does the irony. In the Islamic world, cannabis resin was used in moderation, as medicine, meditation aid, or just a quiet evening's entertainment. It wasn't legal exactly, but it wasn't heresy either. The The Quran forbade wine, not weed. And in a hot climate, you take your relaxation where you can find it. Philosophers debated its effects. Poets wrote verses about its beauty. It was the polite cousin at the family table, tolerated, occasionally praised, rarely mentioned in front of elders. The Crusaders naturally misunderstood everything. They heard that assassins smoked it to summon courage, saw them fighting with unsettling calm, and concluded they were possessed. Back in Europe, the tale grew in retelling. Soon, hashish became the devil's incense, a foreign fog that turned men into murderers and women into interesting conversationalists. There was no evidence for any of this, but that never stopped a medieval rumour. Ironically, the same monasteries that condemned Saracen smoke were filling churches with incense thick enough to make everyone mildly euphoric by the third psalm. Frankincense and myrrh were imported from the same trade routes as hashish, though no one seemed troubled by that. As long as your hallucinations involved angels and not palm trees, you were safe. Some merchants did bring cannabis seeds home, mostly out of curiosity. In Italy and southern France, hemp fields already thrived for rope making. Now they thrive for slightly different reasons. Doctors experimented cautiously, calling it herba sancta in their notes, holy herb, because Latin made everything sound legitimate. Prescriptions warned, take in moderation lest your thoughts wander, which in the 13th century was both medical advice and general policy. A few adventurous nobles dabbled as well. Chroniclers mention a green paste, served at feasts in Sicily and Spain, blended with honey, nuts and optimism. Guests claimed to feel laughter rise from their stomachs, time slowing to a polite crawl, and the world glowing faintly gold. The church called it temptation. Everyone else called it dessert. Of course, no good idea survives contact with bureaucracy. By the time papal envoys heard about these Eastern indulgences, the rumours had become operatic. Hashish was said to grant flight, invisibility, or, in one memo, the power to misunderstand scripture. The Pope issued a reminder that all joy outside of prayer is unauthorised. It didn't stop anyone, but it did increase the price. The fear of exotic intoxication soon merged with old anxieties about witchcraft. Foreign smoke, foreign words, foreign bliss, clearly dangerous. Paintings began to show demons offering pipes and bowls to peasants, as if Satan himself had opened a small hookah lounge in Provence. Meanwhile, monks continued distilling stronger spirits and insisting it was purely medicinal. The hypocrisy could have been bottled, and probably was. Still, something changed. Contact with the Islamic world gave Europe a new vocabulary of pleasure: coffee, perfume, sugar, hashish, even rhythm. The body stopped being just a vessel for sin. It became a laboratory for experience. And while most people couldn't afford imported vices, the idea of altered states began to sound less like damnation and more like curiosity. You picture a crusader returning home, armour-dented, eyes distant, carrying a pouch of unfamiliar resin. He tells wild tales about assassins who felt no fear, gardens where rivers of wine flowed, and a smoke that tasted like peace. No one believes him. But a few listeners take notes anyway, and centuries later, those notes become medicine again. It's easy to laugh at their confusion. But for a world terrified of the body, every new sensation was a theological crisis. A single puff of smoke could undo a sermon. A new scent could spark heresy. Pleasure was an idea too large for the medieval imagination to store safely. So they locked it away, called it foreign, and prayed the East would stop being so interesting. You leave the marketplace where the last of the Crusaders are selling their souvenirs. Jars of sand, spices, and one suspiciously heavy incense burner. The air is thick with aroma. Cinnamon, dust, myrrh, and something you can't quite name. It smells like the beginning of the Renaissance, and the end of plausible deniability. Anyway, Europe will take a few more centuries to rediscover what it's already been told, that mind, body, and spirit are not enemies, just colleagues with poor communication. For now, though, the age of smoke gives way to the age of sermons. The church will reassert its monopoly on ecstasy, and people predictably will find new ways to get high on God instead. The monastery at night is almost silent, just the sound of quills scratching and candles sighing. Somewhere behind a stone wall a woman kneels, her face tilted toward the faint shimmer of a single flame. Her name is Hildegard of Bingen. To the church, she is a mystic, a prophet, and occasionally an administrative inconvenience. To history, she's what happens when migraines meet Latin. Hildegard has been seeing things since childhood. Radiant patterns, blazing wheels of light, voices that whisper advice on everything from theology to herbal recipes. In another century, she'd have been given an MRI. In this one, she's given a scribe. The scribe, poor man, records what she dictates. Visions of the cosmos breathing, of angels shaped like geometry, of God shining like the inside of a candle. Each image is vivid, terrifying, and oddly symmetrical. Modern neurologists would call it an aura. The church called it awe. And honestly, the difference is just marketing. She fasts for days, prays for hours, and occasionally eats something green to keep reality interesting. Her diet consists mostly of barley water and revelation. Sometimes, when the visions become too bright, she presses her forehead to the cool stone floor and waits for the world to dim. It rarely does. What sets Hildegard apart isn't the visions. Medieval Europe is full of people seeing things. It's that hers are approved. A bishop investigates, a committee is formed, and after several months of intense discussion, they conclude that yes, her revelations are genuine, because they're written in proper Latin. It's not witchcraft if the vocabulary is correct. Her books spread across Christendom, richly illustrated by monks who probably had questions but lacked the job security to ask them. They show concentric circles of fire, celestial rivers, women made of stars. You can almost hear the soundtrack, quiet chanting, distant nausea. People travel for days to hear her speak, and she does, calmly, relentlessly, with the confidence of someone whose hallucinations have footnotes. She also writes on medicine, music, and natural science. Her Physica lists dozens of herbs for every ailment, including one remedy for the sadness of the heart, which involves rose oil, prayer, and a nap. That's psychiatry by any reasonable standard. In her correspondence, she scolds popes, lectures emperors, and gently warns everyone about pride. They forgive her because she glows. Not metaphorically, witnesses describe her surrounded by light when she speaks. Possibly divine, possibly poor ventilation. Either way, it works. When she composes music, the melodies climb like smoke, long and winding, full of spaces where other composers would have placed silence. Listening to them feels like breathing in slow motion. Each note hovers just long enough for doubt to seem unnecessary. It's easy to see why people believed she heard heaven directly. It's also easy to see why doctors now suspect chronic photophobia. Still, she manages to exist in that narrow corridor between holiness and heresy. Her superiors adore her as long as she stays useful and indoors. Her visions are published, her fame spreads, and Europe gains its first celebrity mystic with a thriving literary career. Every age has influencers, hers just had more candles. Yet beneath the reverence, there's fear. If her visions are real, they confirm the Church's authority. If they're not, they confirm that women can experience God without supervision. That's a theological crisis disguised as admiration. So the Church chooses the safer option. Call her divine and move on quickly. But even approved miracles have side effects. Others begin to imitate her, fasting, praying, waiting for visions. Some see lights, some faint. A few simply get dizzy and blame the Holy Spirit. Ecstasy is contagious, and like most contagions, it spreads best in closed spaces. At night, the abbey glows faintly through its narrow windows. Hildegard sits at her desk, her quill trembling slightly as she writes. I saw a brightness, greater than the sun, and within it a voice that said, and you stop reading there, because you already know the ending. The voice always says the same thing, keep going. It's the universal command of mystics, artists, and anyone too stubborn to sleep. You imagine her candle, flickering, the wax running down like time. The air smells of parchment, ink, and something sharper. Ozone, maybe, or sanctity. Outside, the wind carries the sound of bells, each toll a reminder that dawn will come whether or not the vision ends. And that's the strange comfort of Hildegard's world. divine light or migraine aura, it doesn't really matter. Both bring illumination, both turn pain into art, and both remind you that the line between revelation and hallucination is mostly drawn by whoever writes the report. Anyway, her quill scratches on, the candle guttering, the mind blazing. It's the medieval version of enlightenment, luminous, exhausting, and slightly dehydrated. After centuries of reading about saints who heard voices, ordinary people began to wonder if holiness could be bottled. It could, or so they were told. All you had to do was travel several hundred miles, kiss a few relics, and drink something of indeterminate origin that claimed to cure sin and scurvy at the same time. Welcome to the age of pilgrimage. Medieval tourism with worse maps and stronger drinks. You pack light, a wooden cup, a rosary, and a sturdy tolerance for both weather and marketing. Your destination is a shrine, usually somewhere damp and overcrowded, where a saint allegedly performed a miracle and definitely attracted vendors. The road there is lined with inns, preachers, and opportunists, selling everything from fake blessings to suspicious ointments. Think of it as a religious festival, minus the hygiene, and with considerably more weeping. At the shrine of St. Dionysius, pilgrims report a miracle fountain that occasionally runs with wine. Not often, but often enough to sustain the legend. The priests describe it as the blood of faith. The peasants describe it as, finally, something worth walking for. Each pilgrim fills their cup reverently and drinks until salvation feels achievable. Pilgrimage is the medieval loophole in the moral code. You're travelling for God, which means almost anything along the way can be excused as spiritual preparation. Eating too much, sleeping too little, and drinking just enough to see the Virgin in the condensation. Salvation with a hangover. Some travellers insist that the more you drink, the holier you become, a theory clearly developed on location. Others claim the wine tastes faintly of iron and regret, but they drink anyway because faith, like fermentation, improves with denial. For the upper classes, pilgrimages double as networking events. Nobles exchange gifts, gossip, and occasionally spouses. For the poor, it's a rare vacation with built-in forgiveness. Walk far enough, and you can reset your sins, assuming you survive the weather and the theology. Vendors thrive on this arrangement. One stall sells relic water filtered through the bones of saints, guaranteed to cleanse the soul and possibly the bowels. Another offers holy tonics made from wine, herbs, and bold confidence. A sign promises, good for melancholy, toothache, and fear of damnation. The price? Negotiable. Miracles, it seems, come with a sliding scale. When pilgrims overindulge, the shrines provide remedies. One recipe recommends ground pearls in vinegar, because nothing says penance like drinking jewellery. Another suggests relic dust dissolved in warm wine, ideally from the same saint who caused the problem. It's a self-sustaining economy of sin, cure, and sequel. The nights along the road are filled with songs, hymns that begin piously and end suspiciously in harmony. You hear laughter, see lanterns swinging in the mist, and realise that for many this is the only time faith feels communal, not preached from above but shared across the table. A collective intoxication, safer than solitude, louder than prayer. Of course the church watches this with mild horror. Ecstasy is fine in theory, less so when everyone's doing it without permission. Preachers warn that excessive joy invites temptation, but their sermons compete poorly with the sound of corks. At one famous shrine, the miracle fountain is said to overflow once a year. Eyewitnesses report that the wine gushes forth with the fragrance of heaven. Later investigations reveal barrels buried uphill. The clergy deny everything, citing divine plumbing. Miracle confirmed. Still, the journey has its purpose. Pilgrims return home lighter, in spirit and in coin, carrying flasks of holy vintage and stories that blend faith with fermentation. They've walked through mud, slept beside strangers, and drunk enough sacred liquid to blur the boundary between belief and dehydration. It's religion for the masses, experiential, intoxicating, vaguely supervised. If Hildegard of Bingen found God through fasting, these travellers find him through overconsumption. One saint saw light through migraines. Thousands now see it through refraction in a wine cup. Different paths, same glow. By the journey's end, you've learned the rhythm of holiness. Walk, drink, repent, repeat. The body aches, the soul wobbles, and somewhere in the haze between prayer and hiccup you understand why divine joy was so addictive. It wasn't the taste, it was the permission. The rare moment when ordinary people could be happy and still feel righteous about it. When you finally reach home, you bring back a few relics, a seashell, a token medal, maybe a hangover blessed beyond repair. Your neighbours gather to hear your tales of distant miracles and affordable wine. They nod politely, then ask if you brought any samples. You didn't, of course. The bottle broke somewhere near repentance. But you remember the laughter, the warmth, and the strange clarity that comes only when faith and fermentation shake hands. Anyway, you unpack your souvenirs, hang up your travel cloak, and thank God quietly that holiness is exhausting. Tomorrow you'll return to work, but tonight you dream of the road, of candles flickering, barrels rolling, and the faint echo of a hymn sung slightly off-key. For a moment you feel the same peace Hildegard did, light filling the darkness, though yours smells faintly of grapes. The miracle begins, as so many do, with music no one remembers starting. A drumbeat, a bell, a whisper that becomes rhythm, rhythm that becomes movement. And suddenly, half the town is dancing. Not elegantly, not socially, just moving. Feet stamping dust, hands raised to invisible melodies, bodies shaking like they've remembered something important and are trying to forget it again. It's 1374 in the Rhine Valley, or 1518 in Strasbourg, depending on which chronicler you trust. Dates vary. The choreography doesn't. The witnesses describe it with a mixture of awe and concern. Dozens, then hundreds, twist and whirl in the heat, their faces blank or radiant, depending on your theology. They dance for hours, then days, collapsing only to rise again as if pulled by unseen strings. When priests attempt to intervene, the dancers form circles around the church and keep going. The town organist tries to drown them out with hymns, which only makes them more creative. It's mass hysteria, or divine possession, or just another bad harvest. No one is sure. Doctors call it choreomania. The church calls it a rehearsal for hell. Either way, it's the loudest sermon in Europe. Local leaders respond with typical medieval logic. If the dancing is cursed, play louder music. They hire fiddlers, hoping structured rhythm will calm the chaos. It does not. Soon, even the fiddlers join in, because it's difficult to resist a miracle with a beat. The only one not dancing is the tax collector, who claims immunity through cynicism. The symptoms read like a checklist for possession. Convulsions, hallucinations, laughter, tears, and that unsettling confidence found in anyone who insists they're fine. The dancers claim to see angels, others see demons. One priest sees an opportunity for sermon material. It's the Middle Ages. Everyone's interpretation comes with a moral attached. When in doubt, blame Satan. He's overworked but reliable. The church organises processions to exorcise the towns. Relics are paraded through the streets, holy water flung at anything moving faster than a monk. Some dancers stop briefly, only to start again when the choir begins the next verse. It becomes clear that piety isn't a cure, it's accompaniment. Behind the divine panic, there's a mundane culprit. Rye bread again, contaminated with ergot. The same hallucinogenic fungus that fueled St. Anthony's fire. The peasants were quite literally high on God's bread, but chemistry isn't yet fashionable, so the church files it under spiritual crisis and moves on. Still, the dancing spreads. A rumour claims that St. Vitus himself cursed the people to move until forgiven. Churches dedicate altars to him as the new patron saint of choreography. His image begins appearing on prayer cards, always mid-motion, the first icon to look like it could headline a music festival. For all its terror, the event has a strange beauty. Imagine hundreds of people under the summer sun, dust rising around them like incense, their bodies shimmering with sweat and conviction. It's collective ecstasy, half nightmare, half prayer. For a moment, everyone is the same, exhausted, trembling, human. When exhaustion finally wins, the survivors are carried to nearby chapels, wrapped in linens and told to rest. Some die of heart failure, others recover with no memory of what happened. No one learns anything useful. Within a generation, it happens again somewhere else. Medieval Europe had many talents. Learning from experience wasn't one of them. The reports grow wilder over time. In one town, the dancers are said to leap into rivers, laughing. In another, they climb onto altars and spin until collapse. Monks document everything, partly out of duty and partly because it's the most exciting thing to happen that decade. Artists illustrate the scenes, women in red skirts, men with eyes rolled upward, angels playing tambourines in the margins. It's religion rewritten as fever dream. Modern scholars debate the cause: ergot, stress, hunger, hysteria, or boredom. Probably all of them. But what matters is how it felt. A shared escape from despair, an accidental community formed through movement. In a world ruled by silence and sermons, dancing was the one rebellion that looked like worship. By dusk, the bells ring again, signalling evening prayer. The priests chant psalms to restore order. The dancers sway along because the human brain loves rhythm more than reason. And as the sun sets behind the spires, the whole town seems to pulse, like one enormous, exhausted heart. Later chroniclers will call it madness. But standing there, watching the last of the dancers collapse into the dust, you can't help feeling a kind of admiration. For a brief moment, they were free of fear, free of feudalism, free of everything except the music in their bones. Ecstasy, it turns out, was tolerated until women led it. Then it became heresy again. Anyway, the drums fade, the bells stop, and the quiet returns, smelling faintly of sweat and sanctity. Europe will remember the spectacle for centuries and learn the same timeless truth. If joy lasts longer than the sermon, someone's going to call it a sin. Morning again. The fever of dancing is gone, and the villagers settle back into their usual rhythm, planting, praying, and dying on schedule. But somewhere in that routine, another kind of miracle is happening quietly. A woman bends over a straw pallet, whispering to someone in pain, her hands steady, her breath calm. No music, no spectacle, just labour and patience. Two things the Middle Ages considered suspicious when practiced by women. She's a midwife, a healer, a keeper of practical secrets. She knows which herbs stop bleeding, which ones start it, and which combinations of poppy and wine make childbirth something other than a negotiation with God. For centuries her kind have delivered the living and buried the rest, without sermon or salary. They are the reason humanity continues, and the reason some priests can't sleep at night. Her knowledge comes from the earth and memory. No books, no Latin, just experience and rumour. To her, belladonna is for easing cramps. To the Inquisitor, it's a satanic offering. She grinds seeds in a bowl, hums a hymn learned from her grandmother, and unknowingly commits 3 theological crimes: independence, competence, and optimism. Outside, the church is redefining holiness again. Healing is a miracle when done by monks, but witchcraft when done by women. One uses parchment and incense, the other uses her hands, and that's the problem. Faith can be abstract, fingers are incriminating, word spreads, as it always does. A child survives a difficult birth, a neighbour whispers gratitude, and gratitude quickly mutates into gossip. She's blessed, they say, or she's touched, and depending on who overhears, the word touch takes on entirely new consequences. Soon she's summoned to testify before men who have never seen childbirth and plan to keep it that way. They ask where she learned her craft. She says, from God through nature. They frown. That's the wrong department. The accusations are both vague and poetic. Flying at night, speaking to toads, knowing the weather before it happens, each crime perfectly designed to be undeniable. If she floats in the river, she's guilty. If she sinks, she's innocent. Briefly. Her ointments are examined by scholars in heavy robes, men who cannot identify parsley but can detect sin by smell. They list her ingredients: mandrake, henbane, rosemary. The same plants grown in monastic gardens, but context is everything. In a monk's hands, they're medicine. In hers, they're evidence. She tries to explain the logic of her work, how poppy dulls pain, how certain oils calm fever, how herbs coax a newborn into breathing. But logic has no jurisdiction here. The trial isn't about science, it's about ownership of miracles. In truth, her real crime is simple. She heals without permission. Every life she saves subtracts a little power from those who claim a monopoly on salvation. It's not the devil the church fears, it's competition. The court records are brief, as though embarrassed by their own content. She confesses under pressure, names a few herbs as accomplices, and signs a statement she cannot read. The judge sighs with relief. The paperwork, at least, is tidy. The punishment is public. The town gathers, pretending discomfort. The priest speaks of purity and the dangers of ambition. Smoke rises, slow and grey, carrying with it the smell of burnt rosemary and shame. When it's over, the crowd disperses, and someone quietly picks up her dropped pouch of herbs. Within a week, another woman is whispering to another patient in another dim room. Knowledge, it seems, is hard to exercise. Centuries later, historians will call this mass paranoia. But it's more specific than that. It's the story of a society that mistook competence for rebellion, and rebellion for evil. They feared the woman who could soothe pain, because pain, after all, was supposed to have a purpose. The irony is almost too neat. The same church that persecuted midwives also sanctified the Virgin for her immaculate delivery. Proof that even in theology, childbirth was safest when men weren't involved. As you imagine her, this nameless healer, you smell crushed herbs, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic. The air feels heavy, full of words never spoken aloud. If holiness has a sound, it's probably her whisper. If heresy has one, it's the silence that follows. Anyway, the fire cools, the ashes scatter, and life goes on with the dull efficiency of history forgetting itself. But somewhere, in a locked cabinet of a monastery, a monk still copies recipes that look suspiciously familiar. He'll call them divinely inspired, and no one will argue, because this time they're written in Latin. History rarely ends with a bang. More often it ends with a quiet hiss, a little smoke, and someone in a robe saying, "That wasn't supposed to happen." Welcome to the laboratory, or what passes for one in the 14th century. It's dim, hot, and faintly metallic, filled with strange glassware and even stranger optimism. The alchemist is bent over a crucible, watching mercury bubble with the tenderness of a parent and the concentration of a man who's inhaled too much of it. He's searching for the philosopher's stone, that mythical substance said to turn lead into gold, and mortals into something better, ideally immortal, but at least employed. To modern eyes, it looks like nonsense. To medieval ones, it looks like hope you can bottle. He calls himself a natural philosopher, which sounds noble until you realise natural includes setting fire to everything in reach. His shelves are lined with jars labelled in Latin: sulphur, aqua fortis, vitriol, and one unmarked flask that hums quietly when no one's looking. He doesn't sleep much anymore. Enlightenment, it seems, has a strong odour of burnt fingers. He lights another candle and begins his ritual, weighing, pouring, muttering, occasionally ducking. It's both experiment and prayer. Each reaction feels like a conversation with the universe, one that mostly consists of misunderstanding. Alchemy sits somewhere between science and theology, half chemistry, half confession. To purify matter was to purify the soul. To refine gold was to imitate creation. It was spiritual engineering, with a very high mortality rate. The irony, of course, is exquisite. While women were burned for mixing herbs, men were celebrated for boiling mercury until it exploded. One gender produced ointments, the other explosions. Guess which one got called enlightenment? Still, progress seeps through the fumes. By trying to make gold, alchemists accidentally invent acids, distillation, and laboratory safety procedures, though not in time to use them. They discover new metals, learn about chemical reactions, and slowly stumble toward the idea that transformation is real, just not the kind they were promised. A few of them write books, long cryptic works filled with symbols, lions devouring suns, serpents eating tails, men with wings made of equations. Each page is part prayer, part user manual, and entirely incomprehensible. When later scientists find them, they'll call it metaphor. The alchemists would have called it Thursday. Some of their recipes still survive. Instructions for making silver water, by boiling mercury with vinegar and reciting psalms. Guides for capturing the soul of lead, using heat and patience. Every success is logged carefully, right next to a note that reads, "Assistant deceased. Experiment promising." Mercury vapor fills the room, shimmering faintly in the candlelight. It smells like coins and regret. The alchemist doesn't notice the headache. He thinks it's divine inspiration. He wipes sweat from his brow, leaving a faint silver streak. He believes he's close, that if he can just control the reaction, he'll find the formula that turns the corruptible into the pure. It's the same dream humanity has always had. He just happens to be doing it with fewer safety regulations. Hours pass, the candle burns lower. Something inside the crucible flashes blue, then gold, then disappears entirely. He coughs, gasps, laughs. He's certain he's seen God, or at least something profitable. He writes it down immediately. "A vapour most blessed arose, and I beheld a transformation." He will die 2 days later, still glowing faintly. Not all alchemists perish, of course. Some live long enough to rename themselves philosophers and collect students. One of them, Paracelsus, declares that all things are poison and only the dose makes the difference. It's the birth of toxicology, a field pioneered by people who learned the hard way. Another, Roger Bacon, insists that true alchemy is the study of light itself. Centuries later, physicists will agree, though with fewer robes and better ventilation. It's easy to mock them now, these men chasing eternity with mortars and faith. But their madness was methodical. They believed the world was full of secrets waiting to be coaxed out, that fire and patience could rewrite creation. And in a way, they were right. They just found chemistry the long way, through mysticism, mercury, and mild hallucination. You can almost imagine the smell. Burnt sulphur, beeswax, candle smoke, and ambition. A yes, fragrance equal parts genius and accident. The same scent, in fact, that will fill laboratories for the next 1,000 years. As dawn seeps through the shutters, the last candle dies. The room glows softly, metal still warm, notebooks scattered like prayer fragments. He hasn't found gold, but he's discovered something close, the intoxicating pleasure of almost understanding. And that, perhaps, is the purest transformation of all, turning ignorance into curiosity, lead into learning, and failure into something quietly luminous. Anyway, the smoke clears, the air cools, and the age of miracles exhales one final time. The Renaissance waits just beyond the doorway, ready to rename witchcraft research and hallucination the scientific method. The Middle Ages do not end with trumpets or revolutions. They end, like every good intoxication, with someone blinking at the sunlight and saying, "What did we just do?" You can almost picture it. Europe wakes up in the 15th century with a headache, a pile of burned books, and a strong desire to invent the printing press, mostly to avoid writing another apology by hand. The monasteries still hum with prayer, but there's a strange new sound beneath it. Curiosity. Someone somewhere is questioning a saint. Someone else is boiling something on purpose. and collectively the continent feels a little self-conscious about how much of the last 1,000 years smelled like smoke. It's the morning after the great medieval binge. Faith, fear, and fermented theology have left a taste in the mouth that even incense can't mask. And slowly, painfully, people begin to realise that sobriety might be useful. Not fun, but useful. A new word starts appearing in letters and journals: reason. It doesn't catch on immediately. Old habits die hard, especially the ones that involve divine approval, but you can sense the shift. The tone of sermons changes from warning to explanation, and the tone of science changes from apology to enthusiasm. In Italy, a few scholars rediscover ancient Greek texts: Aristotle, Plato, the intellectual equivalent of a forgotten hangover remedy. They read, they translate, they squint at the diagrams and realise that humanity once knew quite a bit before deciding to burn it. They call it a rebirth, because oops doesn't look dignified in Latin. The alchemists, still coughing faintly from mercury fumes, start calling themselves natural philosophers. They no longer promise gold, they promise understanding. It's less profitable but more sustainable, and doctors begin to notice that patients prefer survival to miracles. A shocking revelation that will change medicine forever. The Church, for its part, pretends it meant to do this all along. It supports universities, funds astronomers, and quietly shelves a few theological errors. When the Inquisition asks awkward questions, the answers arrive pre-approved by committee. Faith remains, but the hangover is visible. That uneasy blend of pride, guilt, and the realization that too many saints were declared under the influence. Art changes too. Painters stop filling the background with demons and start filling it with landscapes. The human face returns, tired, thoughtful, oddly self-aware. The halos shrink, perspective deepens, and for the first time, people begin to look like they might be thinking. It's unsettling, but refreshing, like cold water after centuries of wine. And somewhere in the midst of this grand sobering, a man named Paracelsus writes, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dose alone makes it so." It's philosophy disguised as medicine, or maybe the other way around. Either way, it's the first time in history anyone admits that moderation might be an option. That's progress. Humanity learning to sip instead of chug. Of course, the old intoxications don't vanish overnight. Monks still distill, peasants still drink. Witch trials will continue for another few centuries because apparently some hangovers require exorcism. But something fragile has shifted. A willingness to ask why instead of simply who to blame. The Renaissance is underway, and everyone is pretending it was the plan all along. Libraries replace bonfires, universities replace monasteries, and painters replace saints with patrons. Progress smells faintly of oil, paint, and coffee. You can almost feel the morning light on your face, cool, pale, and strangely clean. The world looks wider now, more geometric, less judgmental. Somewhere, an inventor sketches the first telescope, a writer drafts a new kind of human story, and a monk finally admits that the earth might not be the centre of everything, just the centre of its own drama. It's a beautiful illusion, this new sobriety. Humanity hasn't stopped getting high, it's just changed substances, from faith to reason, from wine to knowledge, from hallucination to hypothesis. The effects are similar: clarity, exhilaration, a mild risk of explosion. Still, it feels like waking up. The air tastes sharper, the colours brighter, and the idea of progress hums faintly in the distance, like a bee you can't yet see but already believe in. Anyway, the Middle Ages end not with a crusade or a revelation, but with a sigh of collective awareness. The candles burn lower, the books get thicker, and the gods retreat politely into metaphor. It's morning now, the kind that hurts a little, but promises a clearer day ahead. It's the 16th century now, and the party is officially over, not because anyone ran out of ale, but because a few very serious men decided that happiness was getting out of hand. They call it Reformation, a grand attempt to clean up religion, simplify worship, and remove any activities that might accidentally make people smile. Think of it as a spiritual detox, with pamphlets. For centuries, the church had been Europe's largest brewery. Now, reformers arrive like stern innkeepers at closing time, snuffing out candles and insisting everyone talk quietly about predestination. They nail their theses to doors, condemning indulgences, corruption, and the general idea that faith should be enjoyable. Martin Luther himself was a monk turned theologian turned reluctant celebrity. He also loved beer, which made him uniquely qualified to reform the institution that had brewed most of it. At first, the movement feels like a noble hangover cure. Less ritual, more reading, fewer middlemen between you and God. But soon, the enthusiasm turns puritanical. Feast days are cancelled, dancing is banned. The taverns, those old confessionals of the poor, become targets. Apparently God now prefers his followers lucid. Sermons grow longer, music grows duller, wine is replaced by water, which is both symbolic and immediately regrettable. The irony, as always, is delicious. The reformers accuse Rome of excess, while quietly building their own versions of control. They strip the altars of gold, but keep the paperwork. And when people continue to sin anyway, they conclude the problem isn't theology, it's joy. Across Northern Europe, towns pass ordinances against public drinking, singing, and spontaneous enthusiasm. In Scotland, dancing is reclassified as bodily temptation. In Geneva, John Calvin outlaws laughter in church. It's unclear what provoked him, but whatever it was, it worked. The people, however, remain inconveniently human. They brew in secret, sing quietly, and attend what one pamphlet calls sober feasts, which sound like funerals but with bread. Alewives return to selling their product under cover of dusk, because nothing motivates entrepreneurship like prohibition. In England, alehouses are denounced as dens of iniquity, though, as one observer noted, where the preachers who condemn them often rest there between condemnations. Human nature is remarkably consistent. You can take away the wine, but you can't take away the thirst. Reformation pamphlets describe drink as the devil's second baptism. Meanwhile, local governments collect taxes on every barrel brewed. Morality and economics perform their usual dance. Awkward, hypocritical, and profitable. Still, the message spreads. Sobriety equals virtue. Drunkenness equals sin. And enjoyment without guilt equals a clerical error. It's the beginning of a long European tradition. Feeling bad about feeling good. Some towns enforce curfews on alehouses, closing them at 9 for the sake of public order. Others fine anyone found singing immoderately. One can only imagine the sound of a population humming under its breath in defiance. Even the monasteries aren't spared. Brewing continues, but quietly. The monks now refer to beer as liquid bread, and drink it only for sustenance. Given that some monasteries produce thousands of gallons a year, apparently they're very sustained. Of course, every crackdown breeds creativity. New, stronger spirits emerge: gin, brandy, aquavit, each one technically medicinal and entirely intoxicating. The reformers wanted piety, they got distillation. A lesson for all future moralists. Whenever you ban pleasure, it tends to return in a more concentrated form. In taverns that remain open, the talk changes tone. Where once peasants discussed saints and crops, now they debate scripture and taxes. The ale tastes the same, the arguments last longer. The tavern becomes political, which is arguably worse for public health than alcohol. By the late 16th century, the moral temperature of Europe has cooled. The Middle Ages had been drunk on mystery. The Reformation is sober with purpose. There's less laughter, fewer miracles, and a lot more paperwork. But something quietly positive lingers. Amid the restraint, literacy spreads. People read their own scriptures, question old habits, and accidentally invent modern skepticism. Sobriety, it turns out, is surprisingly good for thinking, just not for singing. So, the world shrugs, pours one last pint in secret, and moves on to the next moral innovation: commerce. If salvation can't be bought with indulgences, perhaps it can be rented with interest. The taverns may close early, but the counting houses stay open all night. Anyway, the morning after feeling persists. Europe has traded ecstasy for efficiency, sin for spreadsheets, and the confessional for the ledger. The old gods are silent, the new ones make quarterly reports, and humanity, slightly hungover, gets back to work. The moralists are still arguing in the pulpits, but down the street something quieter is happening. A man in an apron is boiling liquid in a glass vessel and taking notes. He calls himself an apothecary. A century from now, he'll be called a chemist. For now, he's just another person trying to make sense of the world without consulting a priest. The shop smells like camphor, oil, vinegar, and ambition. Shelves groan under jars labelled aqua vitae, sal ammoniac, and essentia menthae. If you can't read Latin, it's fine. Neither can most customers. They come in with headaches, heartbreaks, and the occasional demon problem, and leave with a bottle that promises to fix at least one of them. This is science before science has brand recognition. The apothecary isn't entirely sure why his tinctures work. He just knows that some do. Observation replaces prayer. Experiment replaces hope. The age of miracles gives way to the age of measurable accidents. He keeps records, careful, cramped lines of ink noting reactions, colours and smells. When a mixture fizzes, he smiles. When it explodes, he takes better notes. Failure at last has become informative. The equipment looks familiar. Mortars, pestles, alembics, glass flasks. All borrowed from the alchemist's laboratory, but cleaned up, labelled properly, and blessed only by experience. The goal is no longer immortality, just accuracy. That alone feels revolutionary. The Church largely ignores these men. After centuries of heresy trials, it has bigger problems: printing presses, reformers, and the small matter of losing half of Europe. If someone wants to distill rosemary instead of guilt, no one's going to stop him. So the apothecaries flourish. They blend herbs and minerals, trade recipes across borders, and begin to speak a new language of elements and essences. They invent syrups, tinctures, and powders, each one named with enough Latin to sound safe. Powder of sympathy, balsam of tranquility, spirit of niter, half medicine, half poetry. The labels alone are enough to make you feel better. It's here, in these small shops and back rooms, that chemistry quietly sneaks out of theology's shadow. Every vial is a hypothesis, every sneeze a data point. They don't yet know what atoms are, but they can tell when something's burning incorrectly. Progress, as always, begins with noticing. The apothecary himself is part healer, part magician, part accountant. He measures everything: the weight of powders, the patience of customers, and the fine line between curiosity and disaster. He sells laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, to anyone who can afford enlightenment by the teaspoon. It's advertised as a cure for coughs, sadness, and inconvenient consciousness. The side effects include sleep, silence, and brief transcendence. For centuries, humanity will call that good medicine. Meanwhile, in the universities, chemistry becomes respectable. Professors lecture on combustion, distillation, and gases, airs, as they call them, and occasionally blow up their classrooms in the name of discovery. Students take notes enthusiastically and develop the first scientific tradition of running for the door. Somewhere in all this glass and smoke, the world changes. For the first time, humans start trusting instruments more than intuition. They stop asking, "Is this holy?" and start asking, "Does it work?" A small question, but one with endless side effects. Paracelsus, the philosopher who once declared that the dose makes the poison, becomes a kind of intellectual ancestor to them all. His books circulate again, this time filed under medicine rather than heresy. The old dream of transforming matter survives, only now it involves fewer explosions and more footnotes, and yet the ghost of the alchemist still lingers. Every time a flask bubbles, someone whispers a prayer, just in case God still owns the patent. Old habits die slowly, especially the sacred ones. You imagine the apothecary closing shop at dusk, the last candle reflecting in the curved glass of a bottle labelled spiritus. The word once meant ghost, now it means alcohol. A tidy metaphor for progress. Same concept, new dosage. Outside, the street is quiet. The taverns are fewer, the sermons longer, but the world feels lighter somehow, less haunted, more curious. For the first time in centuries, people are getting high on knowledge, and the hangovers, while severe, at least come with footnotes. Anyway, the apothecary blows out his candle, sets down his pen, and steps into the cool evening air. Tomorrow he'll invent something else, perhaps by accident, perhaps by faith in the strange alchemy of observation. And history, still groggy from its last indulgence, will call it progress. You find yourself in a small cabinet of curiosities, a room filled with the trophies of Europe's long flirtation with magic. Glass cases line the walls, each one lit by trembling candlelight and labelled in precise handwriting. Inside them, fossils, bones, dried herbs, and the occasional mystery. The air smells faintly of wax and dust, as if the centuries themselves have been carefully preserved. In one corner, a jar holds something shriveled, pale, and vaguely human-shaped. The label reads simply, Mandragora officinarum, the mandrake. Once the loudest plant in history, now a specimen in formaldehyde. You lean closer, half expecting a scream. It doesn't come. The root is silent, its myth long evaporated, its power reduced to an index entry in a catalogue of forgotten miracles. There was a time when this thing could command respect, when men tied dogs to it, women whispered over it, and judges cited it as evidence in witch trials. Now it's just another curiosity beside a petrified frog and a jar of unidentified sand. Progress has an odd sense of humour. The Mandrake's story is a miniature history of human imagination. First, it was sacred, a living symbol of Earth's hidden life. Then it was sinful, proof that nature could mimic man and therefore tempt him. Finally, it became medicinal, then mythological, then decorative, and eventually, regrettably, collectible. Scholars now debate whether the legendary scream of the mandrake was metaphorical or just creative marketing. Most agree it was neither. It was fear itself given botanical form. People projected their anxieties into the soil and listened carefully for answers. It's what civilization does best. Beside the jar sits a stack of handwritten notes, part herbarium, part confession. One page reads, "The root, when drawn from the ground, doth emit a cry so dreadful it may cause death in the hearer." Another, written 2 centuries later, corrects it. "The cry is psychological, not physical." A third, written by a modern curator, adds, "Specimen fragile, handle with care." And somehow that feels like the most accurate description of humanity yet recorded. Around the room, other artifacts whisper the same quiet irony. A vial of holy water from an unverified saint, a rosary carved from bone, a pewter chalice with scorch marks. Everything once sacred, now labelled, numbered, and gently forgotten. This is how history detoxes, by organising its hallucinations. You imagine the people who once feared these objects, the monk copying the herb's Latin name in trembling ink, the peasant praying before uprooting one for a potion, the inquisitor declaring it evidence of witchcraft. Each of them certain, each of them sincere. Certainty ages poorly. The curator walks by, adjusting a display card. He doesn't notice the irony that his job description, preserving relics of irrational belief, could describe nearly every era. He dusts the case, straightens the label, and moves on to the next exhibit. A crucible from an alchemist's lab. It's cracked but clean, a relic of someone else's hopeful combustion. You stand there for a long moment, watching the candlelight flicker against the glass. The mandrake seems to glow faintly, as if remembering. It has been a healer, a sedative, a heresy, and now an exhibit. Not bad for a route. Outside, the world continues its careful march toward rationality. Microscopes replace talismans, universities replace covens, the scream of the mandrake fades into the hum of laboratories. And yet, somewhere deep in the collective imagination, the old awe remains, that secret conviction that the earth still knows more than it's telling. Because even as science names every substance, something unnamed always lingers. The mandrake's silence feels less like death and more like discretion. It's not gone, just waiting for better listeners. Anyway, you move toward the exit. The air is cooler here, the light softer, the world outside brighter but somehow less enchanted. You step out into the morning, carry the smell of dust and herbs with you, and realise that progress always has a faint scent of nostalgia. After all, it's not the magic that disappears, it's just that the labels get longer. By now, the candles have burned low, the wine has long gone to vinegar, and the last monk has carefully corked his experiments for the night. The Middle Ages have ended, but the impulse that fueled them, that craving to rise above the dull ache of being, never does. It just changes costume. You could say humanity sobered up, but that would imply it stopped seeking ways to feel infinite. It didn't. It simply switched suppliers. The same longing that drove peasants to the tavern, nuns to their visions and alchemists to their fumes now drives poets to their metaphors and scientists to their equations. Everyone, in their own quiet way, is still trying to get high. The difference is the language. Once it was theology, now it's data. Once it was incense, now it's electricity. The glow hasn't faded, it's just moved into the walls. You can trace the lineage easily. The medieval herb garden becomes the pharmacy. The witch's ointment becomes anaesthetic. The alchemist's crucible becomes the chemist's flask. The monk's illuminated manuscript becomes the glowing screen you're reading from now. It's all the same act, trying to turn the unbearable weight of existence into something briefly luminous. We still chase transcendence, just with better ventilation. Some do it through art, staring into the abyss until it produces a melody. Others do it through science, splitting atoms instead of commandments. A few still do it the old-fashioned way, with a drink, a prayer, or a good excuse. The technology of escape keeps improving. The reason for it stays the same. Every age has its high. For the medieval peasant it was ale. For the monk it was revelation. For the Renaissance scholar it was discovery. And for you, well, that's a personal question. But statistically, it probably involves caffeine and Wi-Fi. The point is that consciousness has always been a negotiable state. We pretend we've grown beyond superstition, yet entire economies still run on attention, desire, and mild addiction. The church has been replaced by the algorithm, the sermon by the scroll, and the incense by a soft blue light. Humanity has never been more rational, or more intoxicated by its own reflection. But there's comfort in that, because it means the search continues. It means the part of us that wants to rise, to feel awe, to find something greater than a day's work and a night's sleep, that part hasn't died. It's just learned new vocabulary. You can almost hear the echo of it. The same murmur that haunted the monasteries and taverns alike, the need to feel more, to push the limits of the body, the mind, the soul, or at least the patience of whoever's listening. We've called it enlightenment, intoxication, transcendence, genius, faith. We keep giving it new names because it never stops asking to be rediscovered. And maybe that's the truest legacy of the Middle Ages, not the plagues or the sermons, but the reminder that even in the darkest centuries people still found ways to lift themselves. Through herbs, through prayer, through laughter, through anything that made the sky seem a little closer. Now, the candles gutter out. The air cools. Somewhere, a monk snores softly behind a wall. The world is quiet again, still faintly humming from its long, beautiful delirium. If you listen closely, you can hear it. The gentle hiss of the eternal experiment continuing, a whisper rising from every bottle, every book, every breath. It says the same thing it always has. Keep going. Try again. One more sip of wonder, and maybe that's the secret. There's no final sobriety, only better questions and smaller cups. So, if you're still awake, congratulations, you've survived the Middle Ages. If you're asleep, even better, you've joined the oldest tradition of all, escaping reality just long enough to make it bearable. Either way, the story continues, quietly, endlessly, somewhere between faith and chemistry, under a sky that still smells faintly of smoke and possibility.